Oh my god, guys. Hello. Whoa. And that's in response to this week's Lovecraft Country, which I'm going to talk about now. So, episode 7 of the first season. It's called I Am. I'm sort of disappointed it's not episode 8, and the reason I say that is because this reminded me a lot of Twin Peaks The Return episode 8, Got a Light, that famous episode from, I guess, roughly the halfway point of that season, which just threw everyone through the loop. Now, I'm not saying this reminded me of that in content. I think it's more just it does the same thing. Where if anyone who's seen that episode, it kind of starts off as like a conventional Twin Peaks episode, if there is such a thing, but it starts off as one thing and then, oh my god, in the middle it's just insane. It just turns the whole thing completely around and it goes off and does a completely different thing and just experiments. It just twists the whole thing around. It's completely insane. It's like a what the fuck sort of episode, the way things like transpire. And this is similar. I mean, I think what's interesting about this episode is that it definitely starts off as more of the drama with the characters, and you get little bits here and there of each plot, and for a while it does feel like a typical Lovecraft Country. I mean, not typical in a way, because I think most of them have been, you've had the drama, but it's kind of, you've got the genre stuff as well, the setup sort of thing. And I think with most of the episodes, you've had that introduced at least quite early, and then it sort of plays with that. With this episode, it is different because you have the character drama, and it kind of bounces between certain characters. And again, this week the focus is a bit changed. You do have a lot of the focus on the if I can remember her name, but basically George's widow. On her character, she becomes like the focus, Hyphanen, something like that. I'm sure I'm saying her name wrong, but we see her again after 2 weeks, because a couple of episodes ago, it was at the end of the museum episode, she noticed like the Green Book like locations that had been mapped out by George, and she decided to investigate, and so she obviously came to the conclusion at that point that Atticus and Yeti weren't being honest about what happened to George. He wasn't just killed by like the racist sheriff. There was something more to it. So they set that up very nicely, but obviously they've only just returned to it in this episode. Yeah, she intends to do something about it, to do some investigating herself. Obviously it's very personal to her because of it being her late husband, and she wants to know the truth about what happened to him. And yeah, as I was setting up, it does this really full-on like genre sort of twist in the second half of the episode that you just don't see coming. And again, it's just the genius of this show, because they take this character and start off with a very like basic like storyline and drama with her, where she goes investigating and exploring all these spots which George have mapped out, and then it just throws you through the loop, and you just won't see it coming what they actually do with her. But it's genius because it works so well on a mind-bending like sci-fi, I guess in this case, level, but also it works because it sort of plays with the themes of the show so well, the themes of race, and the way the show has become quite empowering as well, I think, for characters like this. So it finds another like fresh original way to do this kind of thing, and at the same time there's plenty of like drama and tension as well, plenty of like unpredictability about the fate of the character and what's going to ultimately happen. So I mean, to get straight into it, because it is really the big thing of the episode, and the big thing that's worth talking about. It's so well done. So she leaves the daughter Dee, I think the daughter's name is. She leaves her with Ruby. Ruby agrees to look after her. Why the mother's out of town. She obviously doesn't tell anyone where she's going. She's very upset with Atticus. There's an exchange at one point because obviously he's been lying to her. So she leaves town, but she starts going to like these spots mapped out by George. She comes across various things, and I think what's so great partly about the episode and the direction the character is taken in is we kind of see her experiencing what George experienced, and it's this great payoff to the setup of the character earlier in the season. I think that's another great thing about Lovecraft Country, is it's so well written like that. It's not just the genre stuff or the themes and the way it pokes at, racism and stuff. I think it's the way it's a brilliantly told story as a drama. I think it has that continuity where it will return to stuff from earlier in the season and pay them off, because earlier in the season there was like this sadness to this character where she was kind of left behind by George, and he didn't want to take her partly out of concern for her, and he had this other side of his life which she didn't really know about, the way he explored supernatural themes and that kind of life where he went on these adventures, and obviously she had no idea what they were doing in the first couple of episodes, when they were like looking for Montrose, but she didn't really know much else about it. So we literally get to see her almost experience some of the stuff with which her late husband enjoyed. So we see her going down this particular route. It's like in Kansas, and she like, now I'm sort of wondering if she imagined this, but I'm assuming maybe she didn't. But she sees like an African American woman like flying down the road on like a motorbike, and it's again this sort of like expression of freedom, because they look at each other and they kind of laugh and cheer, and it's just this idea of, normally in this era, this obviously doing that sort of thing is not seen as the dumb thing for like an African American. So it's this great moment of like liberation, and it literally comes through her exploring like the spots mapped out by George, the fact that she could experience this and see this. And I think that becomes the idea to the episode, partly then through researching what George was looking into and discovering this thing, she goes on her own little adventure, and she starts finding out stuff about George, and it almost becomes not just a lot of fun and very empowering for her, but it becomes this kind of closure, the way of like finally finding out what George was up to, and just having this closure with him and with the past. And it's really beautifully done. It's not just about the trippy science fiction element and where it goes, which I'll talk about in a minute. There is something very humanistic about it, and actually romantic by the time we get to the end. But the episode actually starts 3 days like previous, and we see her and Dee sort of go to the house. They discover the house, and the house is in ruins basically. So this is where they've been led to by George's like details, and they figure out then this is the spot, this is where he must have died, but they're not quite sure what the ruins are, or what happened exactly to the house. But she does find like this device in the house, this like particular gold device with like, I don't know how to say it, but with like markings, with like a wheel type thing that goes around. And this is all connected to the time machine, which was the kind of brainchild of the I'm trying to remember his name, but like the professor of the family, the guy who was keeping the slaves basically, but Christina's father. I forget, like Hiron, I think his name was. So it's all connected to this. So she takes that home with her and decides, this could be important, because it starts spinning at some point. And she starts like figuring this stuff out, starts figuring out where George was going and the whole science behind it, and the idea of, the time machine and stuff. So it becomes her sort of journey. And oh my god, I mean, you don't see this stuff coming. She basically gets to this location late in the episode, and it's like the location of where there's like a portal, and there's basically a device that becomes like almost a time machine, but it's like a time machine with a difference, because you can literally go to any location in time. And there's a little twist, because what basically happens is she's like transported to outer space, or some sort of like ultimate or alternative dimension. And this is when the episode becomes like so trippy and stylized, and it's like, where did this stuff come from? It just like hits you like a gun. But the way it all plays out and pays off is just tremendous, and what this show does so well. Now Atticus finds out what's happening. He finds out then she's on to them about the lie about George, and he's hit the road. He's basically gone to St. Louis, because I'll talk more about his storyline, I guess, but the one part that links to this is that he finds out about like her little assertion and what she's up to, because Yeti, who in this episode like sort of bonds again with Ruby, she goes to apologizes, because her and Atticus go to the house, and that's when they see like his grandmother, or his aunt I should say, basically going out on this road trip, because he wants to use the car or wants to borrow it, and she says no way. And again, it's like this moment of her sort of fighting back, sort of standing firm and saying, well, no, it's my car, I want to use it, I've got to go on the trip. So it's again this great moment of drama. And that's when they find out then she's like going on this trip, but she won't. And she almost uses like the fact that they lied to her against them, because she barks back at him, basically saying, yeah, you know, kind of, I can't remember what she says, but there's a line where she uses it against them and says, yeah, you know, this is my right, I don't have to tell you where I'm going, and it's my car at the end of the day, so I don't have to let you have it. So I think Atticus has to get the bus, but he's basically going to St. Louis, and he's going to find out more about his family tree, more to do with the bloodline, and if there was ever like a book similar to the Book of Names passed through his family, because this is obviously a crucial sort of item. And he talks to, I can't remember whether it's an aunt or a grandmother or some sort of relative anyway, and she says that there was a similar book, but it might have been burned, but that there were also like, she's got like this photo album which might be of use, and he takes a look at that at one point, and he does see that one of his relatives in like a picture has a similar mark to what he has on his back, and he's obviously had the mark for a long time, but there's certain similarities there. But it's at that point that Yeti calls the house, and she's telling Atticus that I think she's on to us. I think she knows that we were lying about George. And that's probably where she's gone. She's like sort of tracing his like roots and what have you to find some answer. So she kind of rings to warn Atticus. And so Tick, aka Atticus, goes off after her. And he arrives on the scene, and it's one of these TV type moments where it's quite convenient. He arrives just at the right time because she's got into this machine, and obviously her mind is running wild at this point. She starts it off. She has it all in motion. She's been doing her research, which is just brilliant. And then it's at this moment where a couple of cops show up, and obviously it's typical like racist cops where they're not just going to question her or arrest her, they're actually getting quite violent. It's like, what are you doing here, don't lie to me. But they're like physically about to assault her potentially, and Atticus arrives just in time to help her. You get this struggle going on. And there's two cops. I think one of them ends up getting shot, but the other one, as she starts up like the portal and the time machine, whatever the right term is, he actually flies through the portal, and Atticus is set through, and so is again, I'm trying to remember her name, but I'll say George's widow, his auntie. She goes through, and yeah, it's at this point where the episode takes one hell of a U-turn. As I said, she ends up in like this almost sort of like spacecraft. Again, the budget for this show and the way they use it and the look of it, the design, it is so impressive. Yeah, this does suddenly turn into like a full-on like sci-fi, you know, kind of like space sort of opera type setting where she's in this room, she's trapped in the room, she gets locked in by this by this African American woman with an insane afro, I have to say. But she's trapped in for a number of days or like an undetermined amount of time. She tries to figure out why she's there, how she can escape, and I think it's like that experience of claustrophobia, like just all sorts of things running through her mind. She's like you sort of losing oxygen and really sort of struggling to comprehend things. But at one point, the woman who's called Anne, I think, and again, you can say maybe Anne, there's some significance to the whole religious thing and the Garden of Eve and, Eden, stuff like that. But anyway, the woman's called Anne, and she asks her, what point in time, what point in history do you want to go to? And at one point, she just laughs at her hysterically, and she's like, what are you talking about, basically? And the psychology of this scene is so well done, because she literally is like delirious and confused at this point. I think, like the audience, she's just been put through a complete sort of tailspin, and it's like, where the hell am I? What's going on? And we're right there with her. We're like, well, what's going on now? But she's finally forced to give an answer, and she comes up with that she would like to go and perform on stage with what's the singer? I can't remember the singer's name, but she says that's where she would like to go. She would like to be on stage performing with her. I'm trying to look for the name, but let's see if I can find it. I do forget the actual name, but it's a real life like singer performer. So her wish is like granted. She's sent to another point in time, and she literally, and again, this is when the episode again goes into another sort of area, because we get this like new location and a new attire for this character. So she really gets to dress up and go on an adventure. So she's literally lands smack central onto this stage, and she's thrown into this situation where she has to dance. She's like part of the performance, and it's like in like France, Paris or something like that, and she gets like a sarky comment from one of the other dancers, because she's obviously confused. She doesn't know how to dance. But this is one of the genius of what the episode is doing, because what happens is over through experience, she learns to use the time travel dynamic. She learns to use the machine to her advantage. So what she does is she keeps like going back and forth. So she restarts the whole, you've got like the coordinates on the screen, but she gets to like restart the time, jump back, and then return to the same point in time or the same location. And as a result, she ends up becoming a really great dancer. She actually gets to live that dream out, and her performances as a dancer gets better, and she actually gets close to the singer, and that they strike up quite a bond and friendship, and it starts digging deeper into like her feelings as like an African American woman, but one who's obviously living in the present of the show, and then is transported to like this different era. And she makes this parallel between the slavery era, but then the fact that as a black woman now performing on stage, but for a largely white upper class, middle class audience, she still feels like a slave. It's just a different form of slavery than she's expected to perform for them. She's there, she's on stage, she's like an object. So she has this quite sophisticated chat with the singer, with this performer. And again, it really draws out some of the themes that the show's playing with. So again, a bit like what we had with Ruby a couple of weeks ago, it does play with the kind of pros and cons of doing this thing, because she does start to embrace the time travel and the fact that she can literally live out this fantasy, this dream, to perform on stage with one of her icons with this great sort of musical talent. And she obviously does something which in the present, in her current life, she doesn't have the talent to do, or she doesn't have the opportunity. But with that there are drawbacks and there are complications, and she starts to think, well, yeah, it's pretty great and I get a thrill out of it, but at the same time, I'm still being used as a slave by white people, just in a different way. And she starts to think of kind of that. And I think it's the same with all these things, where after a while the kind of glamour and the appeal would get a bit stale, and you would think about the drawbacks. So it almost leads her to have this rage where she wants to get control. She wants to become kind of the dominant really. So she then says, "I am," her name, and she's transported into the next era where she actually becomes like an African warrior. Basically, she's transported to this era, and she's thrown into a sword fight with this established warrior. I'm not quite sure what the era is supposed to be, but it's obviously one of they're African warriors from a certain tribe. And basically, it's the same thing as what happened with her in the dancing. At first, she's not very good about it. She's beaten quite easily. But she gets to return several times. She goes back and forth, back and forth. And in this scene, it actually makes it clear what happened with the dancing and now what she's doing, because... And again, it plays with the logic of time travel and some of the appeals that it might have. Then she literally she gets better again as she goes through this, and she hones her fighting skills, and she gets to be a really successful fighter, basically, like an African American warrior, but a leader actually of her own tribe. So she actually trains these other African American women up. And this is the point of the episode, and the point of this plot is that she actually gets to not only live out her dreams, but she also gets to take back power and have the sort of power she's never had before. But it obviously explores, well, what's the drawbacks of this, but she's certainly having a great time. It becomes very empowering, and then they really take it up another notch in the episode, because they actually have her and her, I don't know if gang's the right word, but her and the group she's formed, they actually go through time to another point, and they actually transport to, the era of Confederate sort of generals. So you actually get this fight, this battle between this tribe of African American warriors and the Confederate generals, and they kill them. They alter history in a way, they take back the power for African Americans at that time, and they kill the Confederate generals. And you think, oh my God, this is genius. This scene and the way they've used time travel to empower this character is just brilliant, and it's so original, and it pays off what has been set up with her so well, because she starts off as like this sort of quite lonely sort of figure, this kind of isolated character, and a character who's very much kind of seen as she stays at home, and that's kind of her thing. Her man goes off and he kind of has the adventures, and society in a way like restricts her. I think in a way George sort of think, well, that he was doing the right thing by telling her, stay behind. And he did actually promise her at one point then, you can come on the next trip, we can still have this experience together. But he was obviously always in his mind looking out for her. But this is such a great way for her to actually sort of live her dream, and actually get like this sort of empowerment and experiences. And the genius of it is the fact that it all comes through George. It all comes through his research and what he was doing, and the way she stumbled upon it. And it's insane stuff, but it's absolutely brilliant. And where it actually gets really moving is that she gets to transport herself back on the timeline to when George was still alive. So she gets to see George one last time, which is absolutely beautiful. And it's really surreal at the same time, because she's actually talking to George, who is no longer alive, but in this part of the timeline he is. But he even brings up the question, because I'm now dead in the present, history has been changed that way. Are you really talking to me? Am I really here? Or is it just like more like fantasy or a figment of your imagination? So it does dive into this stuff pretty well. And but they have this one last sort of romantic like day together, which is just beautiful. So the way they actually play with time travel and the stuff they do with her is just wonderful. You couldn't really expect it, and it's such a great way to pay off the character and what she's been doing and the way she was set off. And it's like this version of George that she visits and has this last day with, he actually apologises to her for maybe taking her for granted, for not taking her with him on these adventures. And he says sorry, and he says, I now want you to be everything you can be, to maybe have these experiences, this freedom. And it's beautiful stuff, because even for as little as we saw George at the start of the series and their relationship, you were still like really invested in it. So it's great stuff. And then, as if that wasn't enough, they transport together, and they actually get to go on the moon. And that's obviously another deliberate moment of empowerment, because white men have only ever been on the moon. I don't think there's been any African Americans. So it's another privilege that, especially during the early days, when they were first sending astronauts out to the moon, it was very much like a white privilege. So we get to see, through the time travel and the whole device, they get to go to the moon together and into space and experiencing that. And we actually see this almost quite comical scene with them just landing on the moon and then seeing aliens, basically almost like these cute quite cartoonish type alien beings, but it's another great scene. Um, and it's at that point when she goes back and she talks to Anne. Anne asks her, she says, well, she tells her this could become permanent. You don't have to leave this. This can be your life. I've obviously given you this gift for a certain amount of time, but if you say the word, this can become your life now. This can become reality, and you can hop back and forth all you want for the rest of your life, basically. And I think you kind of know where this is going to go, because ultimately she's not going to choose that, because she's been enjoying it, but she ultimately would miss the people back home in that reality on Earth. She obviously has a daughter who she loves and she needs to look after. She says, well, Dee needs me. So the choice is hers. Anne tells her, if you decide you want to go back, then that's your choice. You can go back. So she makes that choice, but then, not surprisingly, with this sort of show, there is a twist in the tale, and she doesn't return through the portal. We see Atticus return, we see the other cop who's now dead return, but something is messed up where the portal is closed before she returns through it, which Atticus quickly realises. Not sure if it's something to do with him and the cop coming through and maybe messing up the timeline, but something went wrong anyway, and he frantically tries to get it started again and reopen the portal. He's not successful, and we cut to this final shot of like the cop, and in his pocket is like a comic book, so obviously that's going to have something to do with it. But it's another like really great cliffhanger to end an episode on. But yeah, the time travel stuff I've got no real complaints about. I thought it was fantastic. And I guess just flicking to other stuff in the episode, we just get other small stuff. I've kind of talked about the Atticus stuff with Yeti. Obviously they're still trying to find out more, trying to find like these pages which they've been from the start. As I said, Yeti does, she sees that Ruby is like babysitting Dee, and they kind of bond because she stays behind with Ruby, and she starts helping her look after Dee and stuff. So there's some nice stuff there. You don't get much of it, but you see them playing games and bonding. And yeah, Yeti apologises to Ruby for what happened and for her part in it. And obviously the subject comes up of where Ruby's been staying all these weeks, but she sort of glosses over that. I think she like admits it's like with a white man maybe, but I think that's partly a joke. But anyway, she does gloss over that, but they reconnect, and it's in the house. Yeti finds the device which was brought back, and that's what tips them off. Just one thing with Ruby is that we follow up from like the ending a couple of weeks ago, where she's still freaking out over finding out that Christina and William are the same people. We get a little bit more background from Christina in this episode, because she tells Ruby that William was her lover, really. That's where she got his body from, and as obviously they've been switching bodies back and forth, but she says he was her lover before he was killed, and she says basically her father Hiram was part of like this order that excluded women from using magics. So again, we're sort of playing on this theme of like discrimination and women being excluded, or obviously black people largely in the show, but in this case women. Christina wanted to be part of the magic. She wanted to use magic and experiment herself. So she sort of explains then this was an opportunity to do that with the access William had to spells, and that he as a white man would be accepted more than. So it's even showing just being a woman is a limitation at this time. It's not just to do with the colour of your skin. It is sort of a gender thing. But that's why she's been using these various people. That's why she used obviously the white woman who had a bit more privilege. But also she was obviously flashing back and forth between William and herself. And it's also suggested that she might be lesbian, because Ruby, as the sign says, well, because Christina says, yeah, it gave me the opportunity to do things I wouldn't be able to do. And Ruby quite bluntly says, well, that includes like kissing a woman while in William's body, sort of thing. And Christina gets quite defensive, all that was sincere. But she does play as she was just using William's like body and his identity as a way to get access to the magic and stuff. And she says, yeah, the answer is in the house. It's in the Book of Names. But yeah, we find out that potentially she is like maybe a lesbian, that she does maybe have this attraction to Ruby, but Ruby's obviously straight as far as we know, so it's a way that she could get romantic with her. But she also was partly using her to act out these missions and to get access really to the privileges of being not only white but also being a man at this time. So all that's sort of building quite nicely under the surface. And the only other like thing that happens, big thing, is that Atticus finds out Montrose' secret about him being homosexual. He sort of stumbles over it because him and Yeti goes to his apartment to find out, and they catches Montrose and his boyfriend in the hallway, and they're like fighting. They're having an argument because Montrose basically is still in denial, still very nervous about people finding out the secrets. So he's worried at one point about his lover being seen going back to his apartment, that kind of stuff. And so Atticus and Yeti visit, and that's when they catch them. And Atticus is really mad, and you sort of feel his anger, but he goes a bit far and he uses, well, a word that I won't repeat on this review, but a really strong term for a gay person, which sort of crosses a line, but it kind of comes from anger and obviously the fact he was lied to all these years. And I think that is something you can understand. Obviously there's a sense that he should just accept who Montrose is, and there shouldn't be an issue with his sexuality, but at the same time you understand it from Atticus's point of view. You understand that he was lied to all these years, and obviously this affected his parents' relationships, so that is kind of why he's upset, more than to do with his father actually being homosexual, but to find out like this and to find out he's being lied to all this time, I think he masks it a bit with this kind of almost anti-gay like sentiment, and there might be a bit of this, but I think that is partly to mask his anger and his like real feelings. And that has been something that's been happening to Atticus over this season. I think he has been acting out aggressively and being really masculine at times. So I guess this ties in quite nicely to this. And I think it's probably as a consequence of what happened to him in the career, which we saw a bit of last week. So him and Montreux gets into a bit of a fight, which, Yeti obviously tries to break up. And this is when Atticus has the idea to go look up his family and find out more about the bloodline. But yeah, there you have it. That's this week's Lovecraft Country. So that's episode 7. If you've seen it, let me know your thoughts in the comments below and what you thought of it overall. It was certainly quite the episode, quite the experimental episode. And let me know what you thought of the time travel stuff and what's happening with the characters. But I thought it was really great. I'm loving the series. And I'll be back next week with my review of episode 8. So take care, guys. I will see you soon. Goodbye.